As the last question from the press conference hung in the air, Naomi took a deep breath, her voice unwavering. "Change doesn't happen in silence," she said, her words echoing through the room. "It starts when someone says, 'Enough.'" I spoke up, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever felt dismissed or unseen. This is bigger than one flight. It's about setting a new standard of respect and dignity for all. The room erupted in applause, but it wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had ever fought a quiet battle against injustice. As Naomi stepped down from the podium, Grant Foster met her with a handshake that felt less like a gesture and more like a promise. Together, they had turned a moment of prejudice into a movement for change. Naomi's journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. She had transformed pain into progress, and her story had become a beacon for others to find their voice. The world needed more Naomis, more people willing to challenge the status quo and demand accountability. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If Naomi's story moved you, if it made you think or feel or remember your own experiences, please let us know. Comment below, share this story, and subscribe for more real-life stories that spark change. Your voice matters, and together, our voices are unstoppable. If this resonates with you, drop a 1 in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going, because change begins with us. The steady hum of Chicago O'Hare International Airport filled the air, a symphony of rolling luggage, murmured conversations, and the soft beeping of distant announcements. Amid the bustling crowd, Naomi Ellis walked with a deliberate stride, each step a testament to her resolve. Her dark, luminous skin glowed under the harsh fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the sea of hurried faces surrounding her. Dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit that hugged her figure with professional precision, Naomi exuded an air of quiet confidence. Her polished leather heels tapped rhythmically against the polished tile floor, their sound sharp yet harmonious amidst the chaos. She carried a sleek leather briefcase in one hand, the kind that whispered luxury without shouting it, and a monogrammed carry-on trailed smoothly behind her. Naomi's hair was swept into a neat low bun, accentuating her high cheekbones and warm, expressive eyes. As she moved through the terminal, Naomi's gaze was steady, her posture straight. She didn't rush, but there was an urgency beneath her calm exterior, a current of purpose driving her forward. People often noticed her, not just because of her elegance, but because of the unspoken power in her demeanor. She was the kind of person who walked into a room and commanded attention without uttering a word. Around her, the airport was alive with stories. A family huddled close, the mother soothing a crying baby while the father juggled bags. A group of college students, all laughter and oversized backpacks, huddled near a charging station. Business travelers in crisp suits tapped at their laptops, their screens glowing with spreadsheets and slide decks. But amidst the familiar scenes of departures and reunions, Naomi stood out, not because she was different, but because she was unmistakably herself. The overhead speakers crackled, announcing the boarding call for Skyway Airlines Flight 459 to Paris. Naomi paused, her fingers brushing over the smooth surface of her boarding pass. Seat 4A, first class. She took a breath, a mix of anticipation and determination. This trip wasn't just another notch on her travel belt. It was the gateway to something bigger, something she had spent years building. She tightened her grip on her briefcase, her knuckles pressing against the cool leather, and moved toward the gate, ready to board the flight that could change everything. Naomi Ellis was no stranger to airports. As the founder and CEO of Ellison Tech Solutions, a rising tech consulting firm, she had crisscrossed the country more times than she could count. At 29, Naomi had built her company from the ground up, starting with nothing but a laptop, a makeshift desk in her one-bedroom apartment, and a vision that extended far beyond the Chicago skyline. Her journey hadn't been easy. Growing up in a modest neighborhood on the South Side, Naomi had learned early on that success wasn't handed out. It had to be earned. Her parents, both educators, instilled in her a love for learning and an unyielding work ethic. It was those lessons that carried her through scholarships, internship. Her company specialized in cybersecurity solutions, and after landing several high-profile clients in the US, Naomi set her sights on the European market. This trip to Paris wasn't just another business meeting, it was the meeting. A potential multi-million-dollar deal with a global tech conglomerate that could catapult her company into a new league. She had prepared meticulously, poring over data sheets and presentations until the early hours of the morning. The stakes were high, but Naomi had always thrived under pressure. Her first-class ticket wasn't just about comfort. It was an investment in arriving rested and ready to negotiate. For years, she had flown economy, saving every penny to reinvest in her business. But now, standing at the edge of a new chapter, Naomi knew it was time to step into the space she had fought so hard to occupy. And no one, not a turbulent flight, not an intimidating boardroom, was going to stand in her way. Naomi approached the gate, her boarding pass ready in hand. The flight attendants at the entrance, clad in crisp uniforms, greeted the passengers with rehearsed smiles. Naomi offered a polite nod as she handed over her ticket, and the scanner beeped approvingly. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Ellis," the gate agent said, her tone professional but neutral. Naomi stepped onto the jet bridge, the cool gusts of circulated air brushing past her. She allowed herself a small exhale, a moment to center herself before the long flight ahead. As Naomi entered the first-class cabin, her eyes took in the luxurious surroundings. Wide leather seats, spacious legroom, and ambient lighting that cast a soft, welcoming glow. It was everything she had expected, elegant and serene. She found her seat, 4A, near the window. Naomi stowed her carry-on above and slipped her briefcase under the seat in front of her. She settled in, her back straight, her posture calm. A few rows ahead, two flight attendants moved with well-practiced efficiency. Jenna, a tall woman with blonde hair pulled into a tight chignon, whispered something to her colleague, Lisa, a brunette with a sharp jawline and an expression that rarely strayed from mild disinterest. Their conversation paused as they caught sight of Naomi. A quick exchange of glances, subtle but unmistakable. Naomi felt it, the brief moment when curiosity slid into judgment. She adjusted her seatbelt, keeping her expression neutral. She had seen looks like that before. She had learned to recognize them without needing the words that often followed. Jenna approached with a tray of pre-flight drinks. "Champagne or sparkling water?" she asked, her voice even but lacking the warmth Naomi had seen her use with the other passengers. "Sparkling water, please," Naomi replied with a soft smile. Jenna nodded and turned away, returning a moment later with the drink. As Naomi reached for it, Jenna hesitated. "Ma'am, could I see your boarding pass again?" Naomi's brow lifted slightly, but she kept her voice light. "Is there a problem?" "Just a routine check," Jenna said, her lips curving into a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sometimes we have seat mix-ups." Naomi pulled her boarding pass from her purse and handed it over. Jenna studied it longer than necessary before nodding. "Everything looks fine." She returned the pass and moved on, her heels clicking softly against the aisle. Naomi felt a wave of heat rise in her chest. She knew what had just happened. She had watched as Jenna greeted other passengers, mostly white, without a second glance at their tickets. She had seen the easy camaraderie, the effortless smiles. But for Naomi, there was an extra step, a subtle hurdle to clear, a quiet question of whether she belonged. She took a slow sip of her water, the cool bubbles a brief relief. Her mind raced through her options. Brush it off or confront it. She chose neither. Instead, she settled deeper into her seat, opening a hardcover book she had brought along. Her fingers traced the edges of the pages, grounding her. She had a long flight ahead, and she wasn't going to let a few sideways glances unravel her. Not yet. Naomi leaned back into the plush seat, the soft leather enveloping her as she tried to relax. She reached for her noise-canceling headphones, hoping to find solace in a curated playlist of smooth jazz. but the calm notes in her ears did little to quiet the subtle tension growing around her. As the rest of the first-class cabin filled, Jenna and Lisa moved through the aisle with practiced smiles and attentive service. Naomi watched as they helped a man in a tailored gray suit stow his carry-on, offering him a complimentary newspaper and a choice of gourmet snacks. "Would you prefer the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times?" Jenna asked him, her voice bright. When a woman in a cashmere shawl requested a blanket, Lisa brought not only a blanket but also an extra pillow and a reassuring smile. "If you need anything else, just let me know." Naomi's observation was interrupted when Jenna approached her row. She offered only a quick, almost dismissive glance. "Would you like a magazine?" she asked, her tone flat, as if she were reading from a script she had grown tired of. "What do you have?" Naomi asked, keeping her voice pleasant. Jenna's expression tightened ever so slightly. "The standard options. I'll check," she replied before walking away, without waiting for Naomi's answer. A few minutes later, she returned with a rumpled copy of a general interest magazine, dropping it onto Naomi's tray table without a word. Naomi picked up the magazine, its bent cover a quiet reminder of the difference in treatment. She set it aside, not really interested in its contents, and turned her attention back to the window. The plane had begun to taxi, the landscape of Chicago slipping past in a blur of concrete and tarmac. During the safety demonstration, Naomi noticed how Jenna and Lisa interacted with the other passengers. The difference was subtle but clear. To the older couple across the aisle, Jenna explained the emergency procedures in detail, kneeling slightly to be at eye level, her expression patient and kind. When Lisa offered drinks to a pair of colleagues seated together, she recommended a specific wine pairing, her voice filled with genuine warmth. Yet, when it came to Naomi, every interaction felt transactional, as though Jenna and Lisa were fulfilling an obligation rather than extending hospitality. Even the way Jenna handed Naomi a napkin during drink service, a quick, almost careless gesture, spoke volumes. Naomi's fingers tightened around her glass. She had worked too hard, come too far to let such things get under her skin. But the weight of the small injustices pressed against her, a slow-building pressure that couldn't be ignored. She forced herself to focus on her breathing, her mind tracing the path to her meeting in Paris, where real challenges awaited. She would need all her strength for those, and she couldn't afford to waste any energy here. Still, the quiet persistence of the discomfort gnawed at her. Each interaction, each slight, was a thread being pulled, unraveling the piece she had hoped to find on this flight. Naomi adjusted her seatbelt as the plane continued to taxi, focusing on the gentle hum of the engines. She flipped through the in-flight menu, considering her options for dinner, when a soft voice behind her broke through the white noise. "I wonder how she ended up in first class," the man whispered. His tone held an edge, something sharp, cutting beneath the surface. "Probably some kind of special deal," a woman's voice responded, equally low but not soft enough to escape Naomi's ears. "You know how it is. They always find a way." Naomi's grip tightened around the menu. Her mind processed the words slowly, like sifting through shards of glass. The meaning was clear, the insinuation unmistakable. It wasn't just about her presence in first class. It was about why she shouldn't be there. Her heart thudded in her chest, a dull drumbeat that echoed through her body. For a moment she considered turning around, meeting their eyes, forcing them to confront the weight of their words. But she stayed still, her body rigid against the seat. Confrontation might offer a brief satisfaction, but it could also draw attention, the kind she didn't need. Not now. In her mind, 100 retorts lined up, sharp and ready. She imagined turning, offering a polished smile and saying, "I paid for this seat just like everyone else." Or perhaps, "Isn't it exhausting carrying all that ignorance?" The thoughts sparked quickly, embers of anger flaring and then settling into smoldering resolve. Naomi forced herself to take a slow breath, her chest rising and falling deliberately. She had learned long ago how to control the outward signs of emotion, how to let the storm pass beneath a still surface. It was a skill she had sharpened in countless boardrooms, in interviews where her qualifications were questioned, and in meetings where her ideas were attributed to others. Each experience had added a layer of resilience, a thicker skin to shield the softer parts of her. But this felt different. It wasn't just a professional slight or a dismissive comment. It was a reminder of the invisible barriers that still stood, even at 300,000 feet, where everyone should be equal, just another passenger headed somewhere. Instead, she was made to feel like an anomaly, an exception in a space where she belonged. Her lips pressed into a thin line, a small defiance. She turned her attention back to the menu, her mind dissecting the choices with forced precision. Grilled salmon, braised lamb, or a vegetarian pasta. She read each description twice, the words becoming a mantra to drown out the murmurs behind her. Naomi wouldn't let them take this moment from her. She was here, in first class, not because of luck or circumstance, but because she had earned it. She had bought this seat, with hard work, with long nights and early mornings, with the sacrifices that only she truly understood. And nothing, not a whisper, not a sideways glance, could change that. The plane had reached cruising altitude, and the first-class cabin settled into a comfortable rhythm. Naomi allowed herself to sink deeper into her seat, trying to find solace in the quiet hum of the engines. She had decided on the grilled salmon for dinner, hoping a good meal might help her relax before the critical meeting awaiting her in Paris. As the meal service began, Jenna and Lisa moved through the aisle with trays of steaming dishes. The rich aroma of braised lamb and rosemary potatoes filled the air. Naomi's stomach rumbled softly, a reminder that she had skipped lunch in her rush to get to the airport. She watched as the attendants carefully placed hot, fragrant plates in front of other passengers. When Jenna reached Naomi's row, her demeanor shifted. She set the tray down with a quick, almost mechanical motion. Naomi's plate was barely warm, the salmon's edges dry, and the vegetables limp. She looked up at Jenna, who was already moving away. "Excuse me," Naomi called out, keeping her voice level. Jenna paused, not turning fully. "Could I get this warmed up a bit? It's not quite as hot as it should be." Jenna's expression tightened, a flicker of annoyance passing over her features. "I'll see what I can do," she said. The words clipped. Naomi nodded, offering a small, polite smile. "Thank you." Jenna returned a few minutes later, the plate looking exactly the same. Naomi could tell nothing had been done. The edges of the salmon were still dry, the vegetables still unappetizing. Jenna set it down without a word, her eyes focused on a spot just over Naomi's shoulder, as if avoiding direct contact. Naomi swallowed her frustration, her appetite fading. She reached for her glass of water, only to find it nearly empty. She pressed the call button and waited, the seconds stretching into minutes. Jenna and Lisa stood at the front of the cabin, their heads bowed close together. Jenna said something, and Lisa's lips curled into a smirk. They both glanced in Naomi's direction before Jenna shook her head dismissively. When no one came, Naomi unbuckled her seatbelt and approached the galley herself. Lisa looked up, her expression shifting from mild surprise to guarded indifference. "Hi, I just wanted to ask if I could get some more water," Naomi said. Her tone was polite, her posture open, as if hoping to erase whatever invisible barrier stood between them. Lisa nodded without speaking, turning to fill a glass from a pitcher. She handed it to Naomi without a word, her gaze already shifting to the next task. Naomi returned to her seat, feeling a small knot of discomfort settle in her chest. Throughout the meal service, Naomi continued to notice the differences. When a man 2 rows ahead asked for a second serving of bread, Lisa returned quickly with a fresh, warm roll. When a woman requested a specific type of tea, Jenna brought not only the tea but also an assortment of sweeteners and a fresh lemon slice. The attentiveness was clear and deliberate, except when it came to Naomi. Her movements became smaller, more controlled. She reached for her phone, opening the Notes app and quietly documenting each interaction. She recorded times, descriptions, and even small details, like how the napkin she received was the only one that wasn't neatly folded. The final straw came when Naomi overheard another comment. As Lisa walked past, Naomi caught a whisper to Jenna. "Just looking for trouble, I bet." Naomi's face remained a mask of calm, but inside, her resolve hardened. This wasn't just neglect, it was intentional. Naomi decided to address the issue professionally. She pressed the call button once more, this time with a clear purpose. After a few minutes, Brenda, the purser, appeared. Brenda had a more experienced air about her, the kind of person who had seen her share of mid-air crises and could manage both turbulence and tempers with practiced ease. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I assist you?" Brenda's voice was smooth, practiced, but Naomi noticed the slight hesitation in her expression, a hint of wariness. "Thank you for coming by," Naomi began, keeping her voice measured. "I've noticed some discrepancies in the service I've been receiving compared to the other passengers. My meal was served cold, my requests for water were ignored, and there seems to be a general reluctance in the way I'm being treated." Brenda's expression shifted into a practiced neutrality. "I'm sorry to hear that. We strive to provide equal service to all our passengers. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Naomi recounted the events calmly, laying out the facts without exaggeration. She mentioned the cold meal, the ignored requests, and the whispers. She kept her voice steady, professional, refusing to let any emotion slip through the cracks of her composure. Brenda nodded along, a small notepad in her hand where she jotted down a few lines. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," she said once Naomi finished. "I'll speak with the crew and ensure that you receive the proper service for the remainder of the flight." "Thank you," Naomi said, her voice soft but clear. She wanted to believe Brenda, but a part of her remained cautious. She had seen how promises could be made, only to dissolve under the weight of convenience or camaraderie among staff. Brenda left, and Naomi sat back, her fingers tracing the cool rim of her water glass. She wanted to believe things would improve, that a quiet conversation would reset the tone. But as she watched Brenda speak with Jenna and Lisa near the front of the cabin, their expressions tight and their body language closed, Naomi's hope began to ebb away. She put her headphones back on, the music a thin barrier against the rising tide of discomfort. Outside, the plane soared through a blanket of clouds, the world below slipping further away. But in the cabin, the air felt heavy, thick with unspoken words and lingering tension. Naomi closed her eyes, focusing on her breath. She knew how to navigate difficult spaces, how to find calm amid chaos. But this quiet resistance to her presence was a reminder that even among the clouds, some shadows remained. The cabin lights had dimmed, casting a soft amber glow over the first-class cabin as passengers settled into their post-dinner routines. Naomi had finally managed to find a sliver of peace. Her eyes closed, the low hum of jazz in her headphones a soothing backdrop. She drifted somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, each breath a gentle push against the tension that had woven itself through the flight. Then, the plane shuddered. The turbulence started as a mild rumble, the kind most frequent travelers barely notice. But a second, sharper jolt followed, strong enough to rattle overhead bins and draw gasps from passengers. Naomi's eyes snapped open, her instincts quickening. She straightened in her seat, gripping the armrests as the plane rocked again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are experiencing unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened," a voice crackled over the intercom, calm but edged with urgency. Another tremor, more forceful this time. Plates clinked and a glass rolled off a tray, shattering softly against the carpet. Naomi glanced around, her gaze settling on Jenna and Lisa near the front of the cabin. Both stood frozen, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. Jenna clutched the back of a seat, her knuckles white, while Lisa fumbled with the intercom, her voice wavering as she attempted to echo the captain's instructions. A sudden cry pierced through the noise. Naomi turned, her eyes finding the source immediately. An elderly woman in row 7, her face pale and ashen, slumped in her seat. Her head lolled to one side, and her husband, a frail man with watery blue eyes, gripped her arm, his own hands trembling. "Help! She's not responding!" His voice rose in pitch, fear sharpening every syllable. "Please, someone help!" The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Jenna and Lisa exchanged a glance, their feet rooted to the spot. Naomi saw it clearly, the hesitation, the paralysis in their bodies, as they looked to each other for guidance, but found only mirrored panic. Naomi unbuckled her seatbelt in one fluid motion. She moved quickly, the aisle narrowing as she stepped past still figures. She crouched beside the woman, her voice low and steady. "Sir, I'm here to help. I'm CPR certified. Do you know if she has any medical conditions?" The man nodded, his words stumbling over each other. "A heart condition. She takes medication, but I think it's in her bag." Naomi's hands moved with practiced calm. She tilted the woman's head back gently, checking her airway. Her breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. Naomi felt for a pulse, her fingers pressing firmly against the woman's wrist. It was faint but present. "Sir, I need you to stay calm. Can someone find her medication?" Naomi called out, her voice cutting through the din. Jenna and Lisa remained at the front, their expressions still blank, the roles of professional caretakers slipping through their fingers. Brenda, the purser, emerged from the galley, her face tight with concern but also with focus. She knelt on the opposite side of the aisle, her eyes meeting Naomi's. "What do you need?" "An oxygen mask and the medical kit, quickly," Naomi replied. Brenda nodded, springing into action. Her movements were sharp, decisive, a stark contrast to the flight attendants who remained motionless. As Brenda retrieved the medical supplies, Naomi continued to monitor the elderly woman's vitals. The other passengers watched, their silence thick with the weight of helplessness. When Brenda returned, Naomi guided the oxygen mask over the woman's face, adjusting the flow of air. A soft hiss filled the space between them, a sound that brought a wash of relief. The woman's eyelids fluttered, a shallow breath passing through the mask. Naomi leaned in, her voice a gentle thread. "Stay with us. You're going to be okay." Gradually, color began to return to the woman's cheeks. Her husband clutched Naomi's hand, his grip a frail echo of his desperation. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice raw. Naomi offered a small, reassuring smile, though her own heart thudded heavily against her ribs. She glanced up to find Jenna and Lisa still hovering by the galley, their roles now entirely redundant. Brenda stood, signaling to the captain through the intercom, her expression calm and controlled. Naomi sat back on her heels, her breathing slow and measured. Around her, the cabin seemed to exhale, the collective tension loosening its grip. She had acted on instinct, the training from years ago still fresh beneath her skin. But as the reality of what had just happened settled around her, a new layer of clarity emerged. In the midst of crisis, true character reveals itself, and today the masks had fallen. Naomi knelt beside the elderly woman, her movements precise and controlled. She had learned CPR years ago, volunteering at a community center, and had kept her certification current through her company's wellness programs. Those hours spent practicing on plastic mannequins in fluorescent lit rooms had prepared her for this moment, and every step felt instinctual. She gently opened the woman's airway, tilting her head back while keeping her neck supported. Naomi placed 2 fingers on the woman's wrist, feeling for a pulse. It was weak and irregular. She shifted her attention to the woman's breathing, shallow and uneven. Naomi's mind clicked into a focused rhythm, tuning out the surrounding whispers and the anxious hum of the plane. "Brenda, can you get the medical kit and an oxygen mask?" Naomi asked, her voice steady and clear. Brenda, the purser, nodded immediately, her movements sharp and decisive. She disappeared into the galley, leaving Naomi surrounded by a halo of worried faces. Jenna and Lisa stood a few feet away, their expressions caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. Naomi could see it, the indecision that paralyzed them, their professional training unraveling in the face of real emergency. Jenna's hands were still, clutching a service tray like a life raft, while Lisa's lips moved in silent questions, her eyes darting to Brenda as if waiting for direction. Naomi didn't have time to analyze their failures. She stayed focused on the woman, speaking softly to her husband. "Do you know if she has any medical allergies? Any medication that might help?" The man's eyes were wide, his voice trembling. "She has nitroglycerin tablets. For her heart. They're in her purse. I can't find them." Naomi turned to a nearby passenger. "Can you help him look through the bag?" The young woman nodded, kneeling to assist. Naomi's request was met with immediate action, a stark contrast to the frozen flight attendants. The passengers responded to her calm authority, drawn to her competence like a lighthouse in a storm. Brenda returned quickly, holding the medical kit and an oxygen mask. Naomi accepted them with a nod of gratitude. "I'm going to place this mask over her face. It'll help her breathe," she explained to the husband, keeping him engaged and grounded. She adjusted the mask, ensuring a proper seal, then turned the oxygen valve until a gentle hiss filled the space. A soft color began to return to the woman's cheeks. Her breathing steadied, each inhale and exhale more rhythmic. Naomi kept her hand on the woman's wrist, monitoring her pulse, her own breath synchronized with the rise and fall of the woman's chest. Around them, the cabin had shifted from panic to quiet respect. Passengers who had been clutching their armrests now sat back, their postures loosening. A man across the aisle murmured to his partner, "She's got this," his voice a mix of relief and admiration. The woman beside him nodded, her eyes never leaving Naomi. Jenna and Lisa seemed to shrink against the cabin walls. Their earlier bravado had vanished, leaving only the raw edges of their inaction. Naomi felt their stares, but did not acknowledge them. She was here for the woman, for the husband, for the duty of care that had become more important than any discomfort she felt. When the elderly woman's eyes finally fluttered open, Naomi's face was the first she saw. Her expression was soft but firm, a beacon of calm. "You're okay," Naomi said gently. "You had a bit of a scare, but you're safe now." Tears welled in the husband's eyes. He reached for Naomi's hand, his fingers trembling as they wrapped around hers. "Thank you. I don't know what we would have done." Naomi gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "I'm just glad I could help." Her voice held no trace of the tension she had felt earlier, only an honest warmth that seemed to fill the cabin. Brenda stepped forward, her composure regained. "The captain is coordinating with ground control. We may need to make an emergency landing for medical assistance." She addressed Naomi directly, her voice carrying a note of respect. "Would you mind staying with her until we land?" "Of course," Naomi replied. She settled more comfortably on the floor, maintaining her gentle hold on the woman's hand. Her presence became an anchor. The cabin's energy centered around her quiet strength. Passengers began to murmur among themselves, snippets of conversation drifting through the air. She knew exactly what to do. "I thought the flight attendants were supposed to handle things like this. I'm so glad she was here." Their words wrapped around Naomi like a soft blanket, a subtle shift in perception that she could feel, even if she did not fully acknowledge it. As the plane began its descent, the cabin lights flickered, but Naomi remained still, her focus unwavering. She had stepped into the void left by those who should have led, and in doing so, had redefined the space around her, not just as a passenger, but as a leader, as someone who belonged. Naomi remained by the elderly woman's side, her fingers resting lightly against the woman's wrist as she monitored the faint pulse. Her face was a mask of calm, but beneath the surface, a storm brewed. The minutes stretched, the plane steadying into a smoother descent, but the turbulence inside Naomi only grew. She glanced up periodically, catching the faces of the other passengers. Their expressions were a mix of concern and gratitude, their gazes lingering on her with a newfound respect. She could feel the shift, a subtle but profound change in the atmosphere. Where earlier eyes had slid over her, dismissive and uncertain, now they held acknowledgement, recognition. but the weight of what had led to this moment pressed down on her. Jenna and Lisa had finally begun moving through the cabin, offering water and blankets to passengers, their voices quiet and deferential. They avoided Naomi's gaze entirely, as if hoping that if they did not see her, she might cease to exist. The avoidance was almost as pointed as their earlier condescension, a reminder of how quickly they had written her off. Naomi's mind spun through the events of the flight, the cold meal, the dismissive tones, the whispered comments. It wasn't just the individual slights, but the pattern, the accumulation of small indignities that built into something heavy and undeniable. She had faced this before, in meetings where she was the only woman, the only person of color, where her ideas were met with silence until repeated by someone else. She had learned to pick her battles, to balance when to push back and when to let things slide. But this time felt different. The elderly woman stirred beneath the oxygen mask, and Naomi refocused, offering a gentle squeeze to the frail hand in hers. Brenda knelt beside her, her expression professional but soft. "We're landing soon. Medical personnel will meet us on the ground," she whispered, her tone brimming with genuine concern. Naomi nodded, the logical part of her mind grateful for Brenda's competence. It was a relief to see at least one member of the crew rise to the occasion. But it also highlighted the stark contrast between Brenda's professionalism and the behavior of Jenna and Lisa. Brenda had acted when others froze, just as Naomi had. It wasn't just a lapse in service, it was a failure of character. Her phone sat in the side pocket of her seat, a slim rectangle of glass and metal. Naomi hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing against her ribs. Documenting the flight attendant's behavior felt like a step too far, a shift from passenger to whistleblower. But if not now, when? If not her, who? She reached for her phone, her movements deliberate but careful. She opened the Notes app and began to type, her thumbs tapping quietly against the screen. She listed each incident, a methodical recounting of what had happened from the moment she had boarded. She noted times, descriptions, even direct quotes where she could remember them. Her notes were clinical, devoid of emotion, a factual record that could not be dismissed as exaggeration or misinterpretation. Then, with a measured breath, Naomi activated the voice recorder. She slipped the phone into the side pocket of her purse, the microphone pointed subtly toward the aisle. She wasn't hoping to catch anything specific, just documenting the reality around her. It was a safeguard, a quiet armor against any attempt to twist the narrative. Her pulse quickened, not with fear but with clarity. This wasn't just about her experience, but about setting a precedent. It was about ensuring that no one else would face the same treatment. She thought of all the times she had brushed off similar moments, letting them slide because confronting them had felt too risky, too exhausting. She had always chosen the path of least resistance, focusing on her goals, her business, the larger picture. But sometimes the small battles mattered too. Jenna moved down the aisle, collecting trays and trash with a forced smile. When she reached Naomi's row, she hesitated. "Can I take anything for you?" she asked, her voice strained. Naomi looked up, her expression calm but unyielding. "No, thank you. I'm fine." Their eyes met for a brief second, and in that tiny window, Naomi saw a flicker of recognition, perhaps even fear. Jenna moved on quickly, her movements stiffer than before. Lisa, who had been following behind, kept her head down, avoiding eye contact altogether. Naomi's hands steadied. The choice had been made. She would not let this pass quietly. She had spent years building her reputation, crafting her image as a professional, a leader. But respect was not a shield against discrimination. If anything, it made the slights sting more sharply. She had earned her place, not just on this plane but in every room she entered. She would not allow anyone to diminish that. As the plane began its descent, the overhead bins rattling softly, Naomi's mind sharpened. She mentally composed an email to the airline, considered reaching out to her network to see if anyone had contacts at the executive level. She did not want revenge. She wanted accountability. She wanted the quiet, insidious nature of this discrimination to be brought into the light, exposed for what it was. Her heartbeat slowed, each thud echoing with resolve. She had been tested, and she had not only endured but stood firm. The story of this flight was not yet over, but whatever happened next, Naomi knew she would meet it head-on with the same quiet strength that had brought her here in the first place. The plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport with a soft thud, the runway lights streaming past the windows in gentle blurs. Naomi felt the shift in momentum, the plane slowing as it taxied toward the gate. The captain's voice came over the intercom, offering a polished, if routine, welcome to Paris. Passengers around her began to stir, gathering bags and stretching stiff limbs. The sudden rush of movement contrasted with the eerie stillness of the past few hours. Naomi reached for her phone, its screen lighting up with a cluster of notifications. Her fingers moved automatically, checking for updates from her project manager and business contacts. Amidst the mundane messages, one stood out. A text from Marissa, a colleague back in Chicago. "Naomi, you won't believe this. I mentioned your experience to my friend at Skyway Airlines and it got to Grant Foster. He wants to talk to you ASAP. He's in Paris for a conference. Are you okay? Do you want me to set it up?" Naomi's breath caught. Grant Foster, the reclusive billionaire owner of Skyway Airlines. He was known for his hands-on approach, but only in matters he found personally significant. The fact that her story had reached him so quickly sent a shockwave through her. Relief mingled with a rising sense of validation. Finally, someone with real power might listen. But beneath the relief simmered something darker. A reminder of why she was in this position at all. She thought of Jenna and Lisa, their condescension, the casual cruelty of their behavior, the moments of doubt they had planted in her, forcing her to question whether she was overreacting, whether she had imagined the hostility. The anger was still there, a quiet ember that refused to burn out. She typed a quick response to Marissa. "Yes, please. I'd appreciate any help connecting with him. I'll keep my phone close." Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, each tap of the screen a small assertion of control. As the plane docked and the seatbelt sign blinked off, Naomi moved with measured purpose. She gathered her belongings, slipping her phone into her pocket and ensuring her notes and recordings were safely backed up. She would not let this story end here, crammed into the narrow aisle of an airplane. She would carry it forward, to someone who might actually hold those responsible accountable. Passengers filed out around her, some offering soft smiles, a few murmuring thanks for her help during the medical emergency. She responded with polite nods, her focus already stretching beyond the immediate. She wanted to believe that something good could come of this, that speaking up might not only serve her, but prevent this from happening to someone else. Her feet hit the jet bridge, the cool, recycled air of the airport meeting her face. Each step felt like a bridge from the confined space of the plane to the open world of possibilities waiting on the other side. Naomi tightened her grip on the handle of her carry-on, her knuckles pressing white against the leather. She was in Paris, a city of light and possibility, and while her business deal remained her primary goal, a new purpose had emerged, one she had not expected but could not ignore. She would not only secure her company's future, but also confront a system that allowed prejudice to thrive. Her story was far from over, and Naomi intended to write every word of the next chapter with intention and resolve. Naomi stepped through the glass doors of the Skyway Airlines executive lounge, the cool air wrapping around her like a silk scarf. The space was a world apart from the bustling terminals outside. Muted, luxurious, a sanctuary of polished wood and soft leather. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the runway, where planes moved with the precision of a well-rehearsed ballet. The lounge's interior was decorated in soothing tones of slate gray and cream, with artful touches of greenery that softened the modern lines. A uniformed assistant greeted her, her voice gentle but formal. "Miss Ellis? Mr. Foster is expecting you. Right this way, please." Naomi followed, her heels making soft, deliberate clicks against the marble floor. She moved through clusters of well-dressed business travelers, their conversations muted but filled with the cadence of deals being made. The assistant led her to a private suite within the lounge, a space separated by frosted glass walls and heavy wooden doors that whispered shut behind them. Grant Foster stood as she entered. He was tall, his frame lean but solid, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of quiet wealth. His hair was salt and pepper, neatly trimmed, and his eyes, a piercing blue, held both warmth and a sharp, assessing quality. He extended his hand, his grip firm but not forceful. "Ms. Ellis, thank you for coming on such short notice." His voice was smooth, professional, but with an edge that suggested this meeting was more than a formality. "Please, have a seat." Naomi settled into the leather chair across from him, setting her bag down carefully by her feet. She had rehearsed this conversation in her mind, aligning her words into neat, deliberate lines. Now, in the quiet of this room, with Paris sprawling just beyond the window, she found her voice steady and clear. She recounted the entire experience, starting from the moment she boarded the flight to the final interactions before disembarking. She described the subtle microaggressions, the dismissive tones, and the whispered comments that had cut through the professionalism she had tried so hard to maintain. She did not embellish, but instead offered facts, each detail laid down like a card on a table. As she spoke, Grant's expression shifted only slightly, but Naomi noted the tightening of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes. He did not interrupt, allowing her story to unfold fully. When she reached the part about the medical emergency and the stark contrast between her actions and those of the flight attendants, a muscle in his temple twitched. When Naomi finished, a silence settled between them, thick but not uncomfortable. Grant leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. He exhaled slowly, a measured release of air, as if filtering out his immediate reaction. "What you've described is not just a lapse in service, it's a serious violation of our core values," he said finally. His voice remained even, but the undertone of anger was unmistakable. "Skyway Airlines prides itself on inclusivity and respect. What you experienced was neither." Naomi nodded, her expression calm but her pulse quickening. It was a relief to hear him say it, to feel seen and validated by someone with real authority. "I want you to know," he continued, "that this will not be swept under the rug. Those responsible will be held accountable, and I intend to address this publicly. If you're willing, I'd like you to join me at a press briefing. I believe transparency is the best way to show our commitment to change." Naomi hesitated only for a moment. She had not expected this. A chance to not only find justice for herself, but also to influence a broader conversation. She straightened in her seat, her voice strong. "I would appreciate that opportunity. My hope is not only for accountability, but for real, lasting change." Grant's expression softened slightly, a glimmer of respect breaking through his professional exterior. "Then let's make it happen," he said, and in that moment, Naomi felt the weight of possibility shift, opening a path she hadn't seen before. Grant Foster rose from his chair with a purposeful fluidity, his decision seemingly solidified in the space between breaths. Naomi watched as he moved to his desk, a sleek walnut centerpiece against the glass backdrop of the Paris skyline. He pressed a button on his phone, his voice calm but charged with intention. "Sarah, please arrange a press conference for this afternoon. Coordinate with corporate communications and make sure the right media outlets are present. I want this addressed immediately." There was a brief pause before he added, "And inform HR to initiate a formal investigation. The flight attendants involved are to be suspended pending its outcome." His tone left no room for negotiation. Naomi sat back, her body still but her mind whirring. She had not expected such a swift and decisive response. In her experience, corporate actions often moved like glaciers, slow, methodical, and only changing direction when absolutely necessary. But Grant's approach was different. He was not just reacting, he was leading. A new assistant entered the room, her steps quiet but quick. She handed Grant a tablet with live updates from the airline's internal communications. Naomi caught a glimpse of the screen. Her complaint was already flagged as high priority, a red banner highlighting the seriousness of the situation. "We're suspending both Jenna and Lisa, effective immediately," Grant said, turning back to Naomi. "They'll have an opportunity to explain their actions during the investigation, but based on what you've shared and the preliminary feedback from other passengers, it doesn't look good for them." Naomi nodded, the weight of his words settling into her. The acknowledgement felt validating, a counterbalance to the quiet humiliation she had endured. Yet beneath the relief, skepticism gnawed at the edges of her thoughts. Would this really lead to meaningful change, or was it a carefully constructed performance designed to appease and then quietly fade away? She had seen it before, in business, in politics, in life. The promises made in the heat of controversy often cooled into hollow gestures once the public's attention moved on. She wanted to believe Grant, but belief was a fragile thing, and she had learned to protect hers carefully. "Grant, I appreciate your quick action," she began, choosing her words with care. "But I want to make sure this isn't just about damage control. I'm not looking for a public apology if it's not followed by real change. Training, accountability, a shift in culture. Those are the outcomes I hope for." His expression didn't waver. If anything, the directness of her words seemed to sharpen his focus. "I understand, and I agree. My approach has always been to lead by example, not by cover-up. I want you to be part of this process, not just at the press conference, but in helping us shape our training and policies moving forward. Your experience is invaluable, and if you're willing, I'd like you to consult on this." Naomi hesitated. It was an opportunity not only to address what had happened to her, but to ensure a better experience for others in the future. It was more than she had expected, a chance to channel her frustration into something constructive. But it also came with responsibility, and with that, the risk of being drawn into the very machinery she wanted to change. "I'd like that," she said finally. "If this can lead to a real shift, I'm all in." Grant offered a small, genuine smile. "Then we'll make it happen." He glanced at his watch, a subtle reminder that the wheels of this new initiative were already turning. "The press conference is in 3 hours. I'll have our team coordinate with you on talking points. We'll be transparent, honest, and set the right tone. This isn't just about responding to a complaint. It's about setting a new standard." Naomi stood, feeling a mix of relief and the weight of responsibility settle over her. She had come to Paris for a business deal, and now she stood on the brink of something much larger. The sense of purpose that had driven her through the turbulence of the flight now expanded, filling every corner of her mind. As she left the suite, the quiet murmur of the lounge felt different. Where before she had been just another traveler, a face in the crowd, now she moved with intention. Her steps were light, but her resolve was heavy, a promise to herself that she would see this through. Not just for her own peace of mind, but for everyone who had ever felt dismissed or diminished. Outside, Paris stretched out beneath a slate-gray sky, the city's pulse echoing in the rhythm of footsteps, the hum of traffic, the rush of wind through narrow streets. Naomi breathed it all in, grounding herself in the moment. Whatever came next, she was ready. Naomi stood at the edge of the platform, the polished wood beneath her heels a stark contrast to the soft carpet of the Skyway Airlines lounge. The room was filled with the quiet buzz of anticipation. A crowd of journalists and media representatives positioned with cameras and microphones ready. She could feel the weight of their gazes, the collective attention like a tide waiting to surge. Grant Foster stood at the podium, his presence commanding but not overpowering. He had changed into a more relaxed suit, the tie gone, his collar open, a subtle signal of transparency. His face held a calm resolve, the kind of expression that softened but did not diminish his authority. Naomi remained a step behind him, her posture straight, hands resting lightly at her sides. She had opted for a simple, elegant outfit, a tailored blouse and sleek black trousers. Something professional, yet approachable. Grant's voice cut through the low murmurs as he began. "Thank you all for joining us on short notice. Skyway Airlines has always held itself to a high standard of service, one that prioritizes respect, safety, and inclusivity for all passengers. Unfortunately, a recent incident on one of our international flights did not reflect those values." His words were measured, deliberate. He outlined the events, not shying away from the details. He spoke of the behavior of the flight attendants, the lapses in professionalism, and the clear failure to uphold the airline's standards. Grant's tone balanced accountability with action, emphasizing the immediate steps being taken, the suspension of the involved staff, the investigation underway, and the introduction of enhanced training programs focusing on diversity and inclusion. "Today, I stand alongside Miss Naomi Ellis," he said, turning slightly to acknowledge her. "A passenger who not only experienced unacceptable treatment, but also demonstrated exceptional leadership during a medical emergency on board. Naomi, your actions helped save a life, and your courage in bringing this issue to our attention will help us create a better environment for all our passengers." He gestured for Naomi to step forward, and a fresh wave of camera flashes erupted. Naomi moved to the podium, her expression a blend of calm and conviction. She gripped the edges of the wooden lectern lightly, grounding herself. "Thank you, Mr. Foster," she began, her voice steady. "I want to start by expressing my gratitude for Skyway Airlines' quick and thoughtful response to my experience. It's not easy to address uncomfortable truths, but it's a necessary step toward real change." She allowed a beat of silence, letting her words settle. "My story is not just about one flight or one experience. It's a reminder of how important it is to ensure that every passenger feels valued and respected, regardless of their background, appearance, or the seat they occupy. Discrimination, whether overt or subtle, has no place in any environment, least of all where safety and comfort should be guaranteed." Naomi's voice softened, and she allowed a hint of the raw emotion she felt to seep through. "When I boarded that flight, I did so as a business traveler, as a woman, as a person of color, and as a human being deserving of dignity. What happened challenged that, but it did not break it. And I hope that by sharing this experience, it will not only lead to change here at Skyway Airlines, but also inspire broader conversations about inclusivity in every industry." A ripple of approval moved through the crowd, subtle nods and quiet murmurs of support. Naomi felt the shift, the subtle energy of a room leaning in, not out. She had spoken her truth, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt sidelined or unseen. Grant stepped back to the podium, thanking the media and promising transparency as the investigation progressed. The conference wrapped up with a few questions from the press, each answered with a blend of honesty and strategy. When it was over, Naomi exhaled, a slow, deliberate release of breath that left space for something new. Hope. As the crowd began to disperse, several journalists approached her, offering words of encouragement. Naomi responded with gratitude, her demeanor as composed as it had been on the plane. She was no longer just a passenger with a grievance. She was a voice for change, and she intended to use it. The press conference was winding down when Brenda, the purser from the flight, stepped forward from the edge of the room. Her appearance was unexpected. She had stood quietly among the crowd, blending in with the corporate staff and onlookers. But now, as she moved closer to the podium, a palpable shift rippled through the audience. Cameras turned, journalists whispered, and Grant Foster, who had begun to close the session, paused with his hand still resting on the microphone. "Excuse me," Brenda began, her voice clear but laced with nerves. She clasped her hands in front of her, her polished uniform a sharp contrast to the vulnerability in her expression. "I need to say something." Grant exchanged a glance with Naomi, a silent question passing between them. Naomi gave a small nod, an unspoken agreement to let Brenda speak. "I was the purser on the flight," Brenda continued, taking a deep breath. "And while I did my best to address Miss Ellis's concerns professionally, there's more to the story." She hesitated, her voice tightening with the weight of her words. I overheard Jenna and Lisa, the two flight attendants involved, before the incident. They were talking about Miss Ellis before she even boarded. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I realized they were planning to target her. A collective gasp moved through the room, a sharp intake of disbelief. Brenda's words cut through the air, leaving a stark silence in their wake. She continued, her tone edged with guilt. They mentioned checking her boarding pass again, saying something like, just to make sure she belongs here. I thought they were just being cautious, but when I saw how they treated her throughout the flight, I knew it wasn't about protocol. It was prejudice. The room buzzed with energy, the atmosphere turning from curiosity to outrage. Reporters leaned forward, their pens scribbling furiously, cameras zooming in on Brenda's face. Her confession had shifted the narrative, exposing not just individual misconduct, but a premeditated act of discrimination. Naomi's expression remained composed, but her eyes reflected the depth of what had just been revealed. She had suspected as much, felt the sting of their judgment from the start, but hearing it confirmed out loud was both validating and unsettling. The quiet, unspoken doubts. Was she overreacting? Was she imagining things? Evaporated in the harsh light of the truth. Grant Foster stepped forward, his expression hardening. Thank you, Brenda, for your honesty. It takes courage to speak up, and your testimony will be an important part of our investigation. His voice held a promise, not just of action, but of accountability. Naomi stood taller, the support around her becoming tangible. The room had turned in her favor, the tide of public opinion now a powerful current. Brenda's confession was more than an admission, it was a spotlight, illuminating the hidden dynamics that had played out on that flight. As questions erupted from the press, Naomi remained steady. She had come to the press conference seeking accountability, and now the truth had unveiled itself in an unexpected but powerful twist. There was no more room for doubt, only the undeniable push toward justice. In the days following the press conference, the story of Naomi's experience and Brenda's powerful confession spread quickly. News outlets picked up the story, headlines capturing the stark contrast between Naomi's professionalism and the discriminatory behavior of the flight attendants. Social media became a chorus of support, with hashtags calling for accountability and sharing stories of similar experiences. The conversation had moved beyond a single flight. It had become a broader dialogue about bias and respect in the travel industry. Skyway Airlines responded swiftly. Grant Foster, true to his word, initiated a transparent investigation. Within a week, an official statement confirmed that Jenna and Lisa had been terminated from their positions. The statement did not shy away from the truth. It outlined the findings of the investigation, which included not only Brenda's testimony, but also corroborating accounts from other passengers. The airline made it clear that discrimination of any kind would not be tolerated, setting a firm precedent. The fallout for Jenna and Lisa extended beyond the loss of their jobs. Their names and actions were included in reports that circulated within industry circles. It wasn't just about public shaming. There were real professional consequences. Flight attendants hold a significant responsibility for passenger safety and comfort, and this breach of trust would follow them, impacting their careers and reputations. However, the story did not end with punishment. Grant Foster and Naomi worked together to shape what would come next. The airline announced a comprehensive diversity and sensitivity training program, not as a performative gesture, but as a core initiative to reshape its corporate culture. Naomi was brought on as a consultant, her role pivotal in developing the curriculum and leading workshops for both staff and executives. Naomi approached this new chapter with the same precision she brought to her tech consulting business. She helped design training modules that included real-life scenarios, encouraging staff to examine their biases and learn how to create a more inclusive environment. She also advocated for systems that allowed employees to report discrimination safely, ensuring that voices like Brenda's would not go unheard again. The airline's new training program became a model within the industry. Other airlines reached out, and Naomi found herself speaking at conferences, sharing her story not just as a cautionary tale, but as an example of how adversity could lead to meaningful progress. She spoke about the importance of confronting uncomfortable truths and using them as a catalyst for change. Her story became a testament to how one person's courage could influence an entire industry. The impact extended beyond the airline world. Businesses from various sectors took note, and Naomi was soon consulting for corporations seeking to improve their own inclusivity practices. Her experience on that flight had opened a door, not just for her, but for countless others who had felt marginalized or dismissed. Through it all, Naomi remained grounded. She continued to build her tech consulting firm, balancing her new advocacy work with her original ambitions. What had started as a painful experience became a platform for growth, not only for her, but for everyone who believed that fairness and respect should not be privileges but standards. Naomi stood on the stone bridge, overlooking the gently winding Seine, the cool breeze brushing against her face. The Parisian sky had settled into a soft twilight, where the fading light met the first hints of evening. The city moved around her, a steady hum of life, but she found a quiet stillness in this moment. Her hands rested on the worn stone balustrade, smooth and cool beneath her fingers. She closed her eyes, breathing in the crisp air, and let the sounds of the city blend into a calming white noise. The past days had been a whirlwind of meetings, media appearances, and difficult conversations, but here, away from the cameras and the conference rooms, she allowed herself to feel it all. The pride, the exhaustion, the bittersweet weight of her victory. A single tear escaped, tracing a warm path down her cheek. It wasn't just a release of the tension she had carried, but a mark of something deeper. Vindication, a sense of justice served. She had stood up not only for herself, but for countless others who had experienced quiet injustices, the kind that often go unspoken. And in doing so, she had helped shift a narrative, if only by a small but important degree. Naomi wiped the tear away, a soft, almost embarrassed smile breaking through. She had not planned on becoming an advocate, on speaking up so publicly, but perhaps the best paths were the ones we never intended to take. She had come to Paris to secure a business deal, and she had achieved that, but she was leaving with something far greater. A story of resilience, a platform for change, and a strengthened sense of self. She turned away from the river, the lights of the city reflecting in her eyes. There was still so much to do, but for now, she would allow herself this quiet triumph. She had faced the turbulence, both literal and metaphorical, and landed on the other side, with her integrity intact. What would you do if you were in Naomi's shoes? Have you ever faced a situation where standing up for yourself meant risking comfort for the sake of truth? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. Whether it's a whisper or a shout, it has the power to inspire and ignite change. Naomi's journey reminds us all that courage often begins in the smallest moments. It is not just the grand gestures, but the quiet choices, the decision to say, "This is not right," even when it feels uncomfortable. The world changes because ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things. Because they decide that standing still is not an option when forward is the only way to go. As she walked away from the bridge, Naomi felt lighter. Each step a reminder that the hardest battles often bring the most profound rewards. Discrimination can happen anywhere, in quiet whispers behind closed doors, in the subtle shade of a dismissive glance, or in the uncomfortable silence that follows a brave voice. It can surface in everyday moments, in places meant to feel safe, and it often hides beneath the thin veneer of politeness. But as Naomi's story shows, confronting injustice doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it begins with a quiet decision to say, "Enough." Naomi's journey was not just about a single flight or a single injustice. It was about recognizing her worth and demanding respect, not just for herself, but for everyone who might find themselves in a similar situation. She turned a painful experience into a catalyst for real change, proving that strength and grace can coexist, even in the face of adversity. Her story is a reminder that change often starts with a single act of courage. When she chose to document her experience, to speak up at the press conference, and to consult on policies that would make a difference, she set a new standard. Not only for Skyway Airlines, but for an industry and beyond. Her voice became a bridge between discomfort and progress, showing others that they too could stand firm against the tide of injustice. But Naomi's story is not unique. Every day people are faced with choices: to remain silent or to speak up, to turn away or to step forward. And while not every act of courage will be met with a press conference or a corporate policy change, every voice still matters. Each story shared, each truth spoken, adds weight to the scales of justice. If there is a lesson to take from Naomi's experience, it is this: your voice is powerful. It can challenge norms, disrupt complacency, and shine a light on the shadows where inequality often hides. It might not always be easy, and it might not always lead to immediate change, but silence only serves those who perpetuate harm. Speaking up, even when your voice shakes, is an act of bravery that can create ripples of change. So, let your voice be heard. Whether it is in a boardroom, a classroom, on social media, or in everyday conversations, your perspective has the power to influence and inspire. When you stand up for what is right, you not only defend your own dignity but also create space for others to do the same. You show that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. Naomi's story is a call to action for anyone who has ever felt unseen, unheard, or underestimated. It is proof that integrity and resolve can transform a moment of prejudice into a movement toward equality. Let it inspire you to be that voice, to take that step, and to stand your ground when it matters most. Because every voice counts, and when voices unite, they become impossible to ignore.